This is another episode of the PlaceOS podcast. I'm here with Steve, my co-founder.
G'day all.
So I finally got you in front of the camera or behind the microphone if you're only listening to this.
Yep, very nerve-wracking.
And I always say, I'm always in these videos and I'm always saying I'm the co-founder and I never give any other job title, but you're the other co-founder, the technical co-founder. Last week I did an episode with Caspian, which just came out today in our time.
A great podcast episode. I've got big shoes to fill.
Yeah, and I gave the warning on that one, like we might be too technical for some, not technical enough for others, and I think that's going to be true here. I was even to a point this morning where I was watching that video and I realized I was wearing the same outfit as that recording. So I went back and I put on a different shirt. So I'm wearing whatever I threw on that was available on the way out today.
And I put on a shirt, but not deliberately.
You're not wearing a pun shirt.
Yeah, exactly. But toucans, they're pretty funny.
You're not on brand. So there's a few things I want to talk about. And I want to get technical, but I want to start with maybe what you're seeing as like an industry trend right now. I'll start with something I was just chatting about with Landell from our team over coffee this morning, that real estate companies don't even know what's possible, and the technology right now is exceeding the real estate industry. And there's no tech gap. There's an industry problem with not understanding what's possible, and also the challenge of tendering and the way the building industry works and purchases means they're siloing themselves into certain ways of working. That's for us hard to solve because it's a business challenge, not a technical one. But on my first point, educating real estate companies on what's possible is something that we're passionate about and trying to solve. And that's in the biggest word of trend is what I'm seeing. What about yourself and what you're coming across?
Yeah, totally agree. I think it's one of those weird things where there's all this technological alignment. There's demand from the residential tenants, but the building companies are just there to sell a space, and they're not thinking about the opportunities.
Yeah.
It's also just the way the building industry works. They've got to build something that's going to last, and technology is constantly changing. But there are...
And their timelines are like measured in decades.
Yeah.
And technology, we don't measure anything in decades. Who knows what technology is going to be like 10 years from now?
Yeah. But it's a safe bet there'll be things like the internet still existing.
Yeah.
And I think one of the big missed opportunities with, say, the NBN is that they didn't push things like IPv6. My NBN doesn't have, at home in Sydney, doesn't have IPv6 enabled at all.
Yeah. And NBN, just for our international audience, is Australia's like fiber network. And NBN is a company. It stands for National Broadband Network. And it's sort of like the worst managed thing of all time, such a wealthy country, tech savvy country, the government department, CSIRO, co-invented Wi-Fi essentially, and then we are not even on standard to our neighbors like Indonesia and Thailand when it comes to the speed of our internet.
Yeah. I mean, even ignoring the speed, I'm sure it's all because it was politicized and the way they're selling it to ISPs and things like that. But in a world of IPv6, everything becomes directly connectable. There's no more network address translation, which is what happens. It's what isolates your home network from the rest of the internet effectively.
Yeah.
So IPv6 removes that, and instead you've got firewalls. But firewalls are easy to deal with versus network address translation.
So let's say the ideal scenario, a telco rolls out, a high-speed fiber network to every commercial building, every residential building in a country, or let's say the world, our most ideal scenario. Then they have to enable IPv6, but there's many elements to that, right? It's not just the endpoint. It's the delivery of service to the at the data center level and the comms level. Let's talk about each of those and is it possible?
Oh yeah, definitely possible. I mean, there are companies in Australia already doing something like this, where they're delivering internet to a building, and then tenants get it as a service.
Yeah.
Which I think is what the future should be. And the reason why is that enables you to have a common wireless network, and running on Wi-Fi 6, for instance, it's a bit like the new 5G networks.
Yeah.
So it avoids interference between the various tenants and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And your internet will be available throughout the whole building. So
Yeah.
if you're in the lobby or on the roof, in the pool or whatever, you'll have your personal Wi-Fi available and working on your devices.
So IPv6 can make it easier for, let's say, the real estate agent or the landlord, let's say the word landlord, of a building to provide the internet as a service to each tenant.
So not even directly. Like you could do this now with IPv4.
Yeah.
But IPv6 enables IoT devices to be introduced into the mix.
And essentially on the internet, right? Like public internet,
Yeah.
making them more accessible, which I think puts people off. They get, IPv6 in many ways improves security, and we can talk about that. But because it's got this, public word in there that is publicly accessible, even though you can still firewall it, you can still put security measures, you can still design architecture around it. It just, I think people don't even investigate it because they think we're throwing all these devices on the internet.
Yeah, and people don't understand it, and they're scared of the long IP addresses versus the nice simple ones that we're sort of all used to.
Can't memorize it.
Yeah, exactly.
192.168.1.
You're not meant to anymore. There's service discovery methods.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the security as well. Like the IP address is more secure if you can't memorize it.
You never know the IP address. And because the way service discovery works, you have to be on the local network to actually discover the device's IP.
Yeah. So we got to this topic because we started talking about trends, right? And I think this topic, IPv6 and real estate trends and real estate or construction, building, real estate companies, not knowing the possibilities. Because this is a big part of what they can wrap everything up as a service. And as you said, they could do it with IPv4 and just have like multi-tenancy Wi-Fi as a starting point.
Yeah, and everyone would love that.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine just walking into your new home. They're like, here's the gateway password username to your internet. It's available everywhere. You can change it yourself,
Well, I've seen examples of people choosing to live places that have that. Like it's enough to attract tenants, particularly residential tenants. Where I think the missed opportunity is doing this commercially. So in commercial towers with workplaces as the tenants, if you have multi-tenancy Wi-Fi, it means it's easier to bridge all these silos that exist in a commercial building. Like a really simple one. And I remember having a meeting with Google and we're talking about one of their offices in Japan, and they occupy the whole building. There's no other tenant, single tenant. So, the real estate has a really easy job. They manage one tenant, but they couldn't provide a simple service of allowing that single tenant to access the elevator as part of their user experience. Their elevator was siloed. It has an API. It at least allows you to see what level it's on and visualize that in some sort of visitor management experience or employee experience. But they couldn't get it to work. And being the company they were, they hacked it. So the only way they had access to something that was managed by the real estate was to go around them and do it anyway. And that's showing how hungry a market is for something. If they don't get it from you as a service, they'll find another way. And then you're ruled out of being the service provider. And I think real estate, if they just understand that people want things to be simple. They want to move in and have a network. It's like such a fundamental requirement. And if by accident and the ripple effect, it improves the user experience, there's just more value to add. And you could say the cost per square foot is whatever, $100 per square foot, whatever. I don't know these numbers. Let's say that. And to have all of this technology is $101 per square foot. Like it's the easiest way to deliver a service.
Oh, yeah. And it'd probably save the tenants money as well. If you think about your current strata fees, you're already paying for like group rubbish, that kind of service.
Yeah.
And if you took in, 10 super high speed internet connections, like 10 gigabits shared between everyone, and just uncapped it and said go nuts, and let TCP handle, you can guarantee them like you'll get at least 5 megabits each or something.
Yeah.
Some very baseline if you just divided up the whole place.
Yeah.
But in general, you'll get 5-10 gigabits a second. And because it's split between everyone, that'll cost less than everyone getting their own ISP connection.
In the same way, the garbage collection is a great example. Like a tenant, particularly a workplace tenant, isn't going to go off and organize their own garbage collection. And every tenant having their own garbage contract, and the cost to make that happen, the internal purchasing required, the cost of just a simple meeting, 6 people in the organization meeting once a week for a few months to work out what vendor to choose is an expensive exercise. And this is something where technology that workplaces don't understand but are trying to is just makes it really complicated. So imagine if you have the base level infrastructure provided by the real estate company, but you also have solutions on top, meaning there's extra the complexities you're removing and less that each tenant has to purchase on their own. And the easiest thing there is like some of these, a lot of what we do with this workplace automation, workplace experiences. Some of those features are so commonplace, like finding a room, booking a room, finding a colleague, knowing where they are so we can trigger automation and today for contact tracing and things like that. If those common elements were provided by the real estate, and then any customization on top can be something you purchase separately to make it unique to yourself, then it's another thing. Like we're working with a number of corporates right now, and their purchasing is so complicated for them as well as for us. And I always think of this this stat that Gartner has, so the research company Gartner that looks at like the sales process, and it's something like the sales process internally for a corporate is 4 times longer than they expect. And externally for the person selling something, it's twice as long as they expect. Everybody wants it to be faster, particularly the client. And if they could just go to their real estate, hey, I see that you've got those services available. Can you just add that to my square foot real estate cost? So IPv6, let's drill a little bit deeper. What else enables that as like a IoT network?
So the internet, having the shared network in the building, just enables you to reach outside of your tenancy. But in terms of IPv6 and enabling new experiences for people, you could pre-install IoT in all these apartments. So like when you buy an apartment, it's got lights and it's got a door lock. Now, if that door lock was an IoT door lock, your blinds were IoT, your lights were IoT enabled, and it's all set up and ready to go. And all you have to do is give them the keys to the account effectively. And then they can control everything from their phone. You can still have physical light switches and everything. But the big barrier to entry for home automation is probably the technical requirements to get it working, and knowing which hardware to buy, because there's so much out there and a lot of it's junk.
And I guess the scale. I mean, the thing that makes it easier in this corporate landscape and in commercial buildings is scale is working for you. Because you can get the the economies of scale. But if you're a single dwelling, you can't invest $1 million in an automation platform. So I guess the connectivity leads to that scale too. And one of the trends we're seeing a lot is finally some level of standardization in device communication protocols and things like that.
So all the major manufacturers and software companies have decided on a standardized protocol layer effectively. So they still have their own siloed, like Apple Home or Google Home, Google Nest, or those kind of platforms. Alexa and things like that, but the underlying communication is the same. So building a gateway to allow all those platforms to work seamlessly with the hardware that's in a dwelling isn't too difficult. and that gateway is what you'd use to allocate those devices to a new tenant.
And that gateway protocol is often embedded on the network hardware.
Yeah, so all the new network hardware supports. So that's different again. Actually, that's the transport layer.
Yeah.
So like wireless is just transporting your TCP protocol.
Yeah. So the communication protocol is the TCP. Then it's transported via a wireless protocol, and there's IoT wireless protocols now that support like a mesh network and the main one being Thread.
Yeah, so Thread and Zigbee, they're all the same effectively.
Yeah.
So there's a few different frequencies, but the underlying protocol's the same. So what's being sent over those different frequencies.
Yeah.
So it's simple enough to build software that communicates with the devices. Like obviously you have to tune your software for each individual device, but the actual communication layer is the same.
I mean, this is where we can plug our own platform, right? So our device driver ecosystem takes care of a lot of that. And everything else is that infrastructure with the protocols built in.
And so, I mean, I would probably say that in a dwelling, the users would be using their phones or whatever ecosystem they've decided to use, like an Android or iOS or whatever.
Or no phone at all, and just like their voice or their
their
but
you'd probably, if you were going to do that,
yeah.
you'd stick a smart speaker in the building. But people might get a bit funny about that.
People do, yeah.
Yeah.
So, your wife does, right?
Yeah. So
all this home automation, your wife is like, no, not in my house.
Yeah. Although we've got it.
You won the argument.
Yeah. Well, you can turn off the people can listen to your conversations.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, let them pick the smart speaker they want if they want to do that. But the idea is to simplify that barrier of entry, make it so that it's seamless. Like you use what you used to, you don't see anything else. Where our platform would come into play would be enabling the greater experiences of the building.
Yeah.
So like scheduling systems and things like that. Like if guests want to come to the building.
Schedule access.
Yeah, schedule access. So you can just give them, like as a tenant, you could send a friend access to the building.
Yeah.
It'll automatically book a car space, tell them where the car space is. They can swipe up in the lift without having to contact the owner. And when they do, that can send an alert to the owner so people are aware they're coming.
And then obviously all the service providers have the same thing, temporary access between the hours you grant them.
So
based on what they're doing.
Give cleaners access to your apartment, get alerts when they've entered and when they've left. So you've got this a whole lot more visibility into what's going on in your house.
And both the residential and commercial, because a lot of these same things apply to a workplace, and there's such a crossover and blurred lines between all these areas, and mixed in hospitality as well, hotels. They all have this same fundamental needs, just slightly different users.
Yeah, like hotels would 100% benefit from this.
Yeah.
Like I feel like commercial workspaces would as well. It might be a little bit trickier, but hotels and residential would almost be the same. Like allocating access to a dwelling should be as simple as like, here's the push message to your phone, join, go from there.
I guess the workplace, you just need more security and control around it, and rules, and building sort of business rules and engine around it, which is all just logic, potentially within PlaceOS, and then just making decisions in the design, like what do you want them to have access to? Maybe if it's a service provider, maybe just the lockers that are outside the secure area. So they drop off the shirts in a locker rather than access the workplace. And then the employee is notified, hey, your shirt's clean. It's in the locker that's outside our main doors. Or whatever it may be. Or the we're doing this project with this client Ashtray, and based in Atlanta, they are connecting to service delivery. And the whole premise is we don't have a big workforce. We don't have reception employees that can just like help the delivery collection and drop off. So we're building experiences around that to automate as much as possible, so people don't need to be involved as much.
Yeah, I'd say the big issue with corporate is just the mindset of like the security and network teams versus the practical realities of implementing it. But if you're looking at something like a more flexible commercial space, so if you're looking at something like WeWork, like they could implement something like this. And I think that's what they were sort of trying to do, because they called themselves a tech company, but they didn't do anything innovative. So no one really considered them a tech company.
And they proved a market need, which is great. And it's great for all these real estate companies now. It's sort of following with the commercial model that actually works.
And everyone in those tenancies are happy to share the internet, which is what I think would be the challenge with a corporate space in a big skyscraper, for instance.
So one last sort of comment on this topic before I want to shift gears a little bit. On that exactly, there's real estate companies approaching us now. We're hearing, we're seeing these trends just develop because 5 real estate companies will ask us the same thing. And one of those is because of this work from home that's happening a lot now, and it's, a complete line down the middle, people like working from home or they hate it. And so, and you might be on both sides of the fence depending on what task you're doing. For certain things you want to be at home, for certain things you want to be in the office. But it has proven that your home is not just your home; it's got to be multifunctional. So you could have a real estate tower, and 90% of that tower is dwellings, people living there. But you could have 1 or 2 floors as co-working. So have co-working in the residential tower.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
And then it's like multi-tenancy Wi-Fi.
You can work from home, but just upstairs.
Exactly. Which is fit for purpose, because that's one of the main things. I hate working from home because my home is not fit for purpose. It's designed as a home. It's a nice place to be.
And you've got kids and all that sort of stuff. But if you can, still spend a lot of time with your kids, because your travel time is like the time it takes a lift to go up a couple of floors.
Yeah. And so that concept, imagine just spreading that out anywhere. So work can be flexible, including the real estate. So maybe there's some co-working above a popular train station. Maybe there's some co-working. Maybe you're a large corporate and you work out where your employees actually live, and you're like, oh, actually, a big chunk of them, 15%, live in this one region, and there's a shopping center there that's struggling to make any money. Because retail's dead. Let's take a few shops and make those shop fronts co-working. And it'll be cheaper real estate. It will be closer to the employees. And it's just these ideas are quite obvious to us. But sometimes the real estate doesn't see it as clearly because they're too in it. They're too ingrained in just doing the same thing and releasing the same tenders and not thinking about that. I mean, there's exceptions to those rules. We do have real estate clients and partners that are feeding a lot of these ideas, but there's others that just are missing these opportunities. Even ones that manage, have all of these different asset types. They have a shopping center, they do residential, they do hospitality, they do commercial towers, and they don't even have any crossover between any of them. That doesn't make sense to me.
I mean, they're not tech-first companies, so they're just not thinking about it.
So let's shift gears into a bit more technology. A technology trend I'm seeing a lot, and our good partners at Cisco making the headlines quite often because they're acquiring and investing in companies that are serverless. What does that actually mean, and how are we sort of related to this trend?
So it's sort of a narrow and broad term. So a lot of people can think of it in either the narrow sense or the broad sense. And sort of the narrowest view of serverless is you write a function, so a small bit of code that does one thing effectively, and you can put that into the cloud. I mean, technically it's going to be running on a server at some point, so the term serverless is a bit meaningless.
I think that's the thing. It's hard. It's like, what is it, magic? How does it work if there's no server?
So it's just being scheduled onto a server. And you don't have to manage the server. You don't have to manage patching the server. The server goes down. It's all seamless from your point of view.
And who's you in that scenario?
Like anyone that wants to publish some code or do anything on the web, or but the broader view of serverless is just any code that doesn't require you to manage a server.
Yes.
So you can say, here's my service. I want it to be highly available, and scale this much or scale up and down based on load and whatever you put in. And then just let the service provider deal with that. So you're not dealing with servers effectively.
Okay. So that's a definition of one trend. Another trend in IT land, and again, like I feel like so many companies are speaking about it now, sort of the orchestration and things like K8s and let's
so
talk about that.
Kubernetes and Fargates and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the layer that sits below serverless, and like the narrow view of serverless sits on top of an orchestration layer, and then there's another, that's just the next layer up.
Yeah.
But if you go one layer down for the broader view, it's still serverless effectively.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the space we play in, and Cisco's investing a lot in the orchestration layer, like security of that layer and the actual management of resources. That so they want to deploy something serverlessly. They've got this layer where they can do that, so they can be more of a software company and abstract all the hardware away.
Would you say that the reason this technology exists and the trend driving it is because everyone wants to provide everything as a service? So it's platform as a service, software as a service. Does this help people achieve that?
Yeah, it definitely helps people achieve it. It's not the only reason. I'd say the main reason is to get rid of that management overhead.
Yeah.
So you can hire fewer staff. You don't have to worry about downtime as much. High availability is sort of built in.
Yeah.
And
scale, right? So it auto scales.
Well, so if your product auto scales, then yes.
Yes.
But
it's not as simple as
it can just be if you want to host some software that you have that doesn't scale, but if anything goes wrong, you want it to keep running. So like business continuity is probably what it's really there for. But then if you're building a complicated app that can auto scale and needs like various resources automatically allocated, and if things go down or servers need patching, it's all kept running without you having to think very hard from an application perspective.
Yeah.
And you let the company that's good at doing the patching and managing that orchestration layer do what they do best. So it's basically platforms on platforms on platforms.
Yeah.
It's like standing on the shoulders of giants, but in a more literal sense.
It's getting more complicated to explain infrastructure and architecture in IT land at the moment. And I think a lot of companies are still just getting their heads around solution sales. They're used to just pointing all the lines to a box and saying server.
Yeah.
Where now there's so much more to it, but it's because it's improved where it's the evolution of what server technology is.
Yeah.
So, and another sort of thing we're working on, which I think is almost the opposite, is when we do like processing on the edge or put a component of our solution on some local hardware. And an example of that, again, with our partners at Cisco, is that their network switches, or a lot of their products, have compute power built in.
Yeah.
So we could have a network switch with local elements of PlaceOS controlling devices, and then that network switch is all of a sudden an IoT gateway.
Yeah. So I guess the driving force behind us pushing ourselves to adopt that technology is that we really try to reduce the amount of impact that we have on a workplace. Like, we don't want to introduce new hardware to perform a function, because most workplaces have enough equipment already in place to do a lot of the tracking and people finding and things like that companies want.
It's frustrating for me when I'm with a client and they're rolling out sensors in a room that has an intelligent Wi-Fi network. Or even in a room that has a lighting sensor and they're putting a sensor right next to the lighting sensor. I'm like, audit what you have. It probably already gives you the data that you're after.
Yeah, exactly. It's an integration issue, not a solution issue.
Yeah.
So they're looking for solutions, but not looking at what they could integrate with that already exists. And I think the Cisco network switches are a perfect example of this. So if we wanted to do edge computing before this technology came out or was released by Cisco, you'd have to install a server somewhere, and then someone's got to manage that server. And it's just going to run a bit of software that doesn't use much CPU, so the server's probably underutilized as well. Whereas deploying it onto a Cisco switch, we're using resources that the switch isn't using, because the switch is like over-resourced and not often using its complete capacity in terms of processing. But they've built it like a standard orchestration platform. So it's as simple as deploying what we do in the cloud, like a little bit more management in terms of saying, I want this image to go on this switch. But in terms of high availability, if you put the same images on two switches, then if one switch goes down, you've still got the software running on the other switch, and that maintains all the connections.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point. Like, we would probably not like to support the idea of someone having a local server, the old school days. I remember you and I, when we worked at the University of Sydney together, one of the IT projects that were happening at the time was auditing where all of those servers under desks were and moving them to the centralized data center. And they were literally under desks. There'll be like someone's email server that they were kicking as they moved their chair around. And we're trying to get far away from that, but still supporting a model that is similar in a sense, but leveraging existing infrastructure, which is managed.
Yeah, someone's already managing that switch, whether it's Cisco or local IT staff. They've already got a patching solution for that and upgraded paths and things. Like, it's something they're already doing, so they don't have to do anything more to allow us to run software on that from a management perspective.
And what's the benefit for not just doing it all on a cloud application?
This comes back to IPv6 again. Because all these, typically older buildings are running IPv4 and segmented networks, and they have like BMS systems that are just not connected to the internet. I mean, technically they're on a switch that's got internet connectivity. But the network's been completely isolated because they're running some old software that could easily be hacked, and so they want to isolate it. By putting our software on the switches, they can grant access for just our software to that private network. And they can whitelist any connections we're making to the internet. So they sort of firewalled off a container that runs our software, and we can now connect to the lighting systems or the BMS systems or HVAC, all these systems that they don't want the internet touching.
So in an ideal world, would like this problem will solve itself when everything becomes IPv6 enabled?
Yeah, exactly. Because, it might not, because of security concerns.
And just architecture design choices.
So in an ideal world, everything's IPv6, and you just have firewall exceptions for, say, PlaceOS Cloud to connect to those services. But people are nervous, so they might still want to firewall it off with the Cisco switches. So it makes sense to be able to run something locally.
In 10 years, our banking clients will probably still want to do it this way.
Exactly.
So I want to wrap up with, I'm going to put you on the spot, and I've plugged my laptop in. You've recently updated PlaceOS back office to have a whole bunch of new features. I just want you to show me one feature that you like most.
Well, so one of the services that I've been working on recently has been an upgrade to our location services. So we've moved to a unified data model where no matter what the data source is, it sort of comes out in a common data format. And the reason we did that was for things like contact tracing and post analytics.
So we could start with like Cisco Meraki Intelligent Network giving us location, and you could change that to another source of that data.
Yeah, like DNA spaces.
DNA spaces or even sensors or something.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's just wireless. But we've also got like desk booking information, meeting room information. So if you're trying to locate somebody, you might have their wireless information, but you've also got this meeting is on and they're one of the attendees and they're in the building. So they're probably going to be in that meeting room.
Yeah.
And then they've booked this desk, and maybe there's a desk sensor, so we know they're at that desk and they're sitting there. So it's that information that's all being filtered into one service, so you can get a unified view of a floor or a building. And as part of that, we've been working on zones and basically a complete overhaul in how our mapping's done. So part of this is you can just upload, like if you've got a new map, you can just drag and drop to upload it. However, you can also draw regions on the map. So I've just got a example here where I can define new areas. So maybe this is the admin area, and I can just draw.
So where like the admin staff sit or something.
Yeah. And so when people are in this area, so that's like if they're in a meeting or they're on the Wi-Fi and they're being detected in that area, we can do people counting, capacity management, and all that analytics ends up being sent to our analytics services. Yeah. So then you can visualize over time usage and things like that.
And one of the common requests we're getting is to change the capacity in an easy way, because of COVID, today you might support 20 people in this particular zone, and eventually you might, get to 100 people, but maybe not immediately. So every day you might change the capacity based on the current status of COVID.
Yeah, exactly. And you can see trends over time. So you can see, are we, hiring more staff and we're running out of capacity in this area. Yeah. So you'll get those trend lines. Yeah. And so one of the projects we've got going on in the background as well is how to answer those sort of common questions.
Okay, I said one thing. That was one thing. Otherwise, we'll get into more of a training session of PlaceOS back office, which we're more than happy to do for anyone. Thanks for coming in to your own office.
Yeah. No, it's great to be here. Only rock up one day a week these days.
Yeah, well, that's I'm the opposite of
this week.
We're actually a good representation of the data that our client PwC found out about their own clients. That some people like doing one day a week, and some people like working from home one day a week. I'm here at least 4 days a week. I hate working from home. Yeah, but one day a week, every now and again, I'll be at home.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Awesome.